The Maiden of the Forest by pumpkinmoose22. Chapter 6. Her warm smile lit up his soul. Kit couldn't believe it. She had come! Exhaling a breath of pure joy, he twisted around as he saw her begin to descend the steps. "Excuse me," he said to the Princess Shelina, inclining his head. He faintly heard the Grand Duke apologizing to the princess, but he didn't care. His maiden was here, and the only thing that mattered was reaching her side as soon as he could. At the bottom of the steps, he took a moment to compose himself. He couldn't very well go skipping out onto the dance floor. He needed to be somewhat dignified. Taking a couple of deep breaths, he straightened himself and turned the corner that would lead him into the ballroom. He couldn't help the satisfied smirk on his face as a wave of triumph washed over him. His hope had been restored. By the end of the night, he would have secured the hand of his maiden, for he was sure she would enchant his father and the Grand Duke. He stepped into the ballroom the second the fair lady finished her descent on the steps. He smiled joyfully as he let out a breath at the sight of her beauty. Her glorious brown eyes searched the crowd until she saw him. Kit felt like they were the only ones in the room. His feet propelled him towards her, and he was pleased to see she was happily going to meet him halfway. The people parted, but Kit only had eyes for her. They stopped before each other, and Kit thought his heart was going to fly out of his chest. "Mr. Kit," she said with a radiant smile. Kit's whole soul soared. "It's you, isn't it?" he asked, reveling in her beauty. "Just so," she replied, shrugging her shoulder ever so slightly. He found her positively adorable, staring into her eyes, taking in her countenance. He couldn't believe he had been foolish enough to mistake her for a mere maiden. She was clearly a princess, for she radiated with the grace of royalty. He could only assume she was dressed as she had been in the woods, to have a moment of reprieve without being waited upon by her servants. What she must think of him! And yet, here she stood, her eyes filled with adoration solely for him. He couldn't fathom it. Shaking his head, dazed, he whispered adoringly, "Your Highness." He took a deep breath. "If I may, that is." What was he trying to say? "It would give me the greatest pleasure if you would do me the honor of letting me lead you through this. The first." Words failed him. She was positively stunning. He had become lost in the earthy pools of her eyes. Searching his face, a fascinating smile climbed her thin cheeks. "Dance?" she prompted. "Yes," he breathed, remembering himself, laughing sheepishly. "Dance, that's it." She nodded her head eagerly. Kit regained his bearings and wrapped his hand around the thin waist, resting it against her back. The two stepped closer together. She let out a small gasp before smiling at him. The music began, and the two started to sway. At the first spin, she looked at him with wide eyes. "They're all looking at you," she said a little breathlessly. "Believe me, they're all looking at you," he said with a charming smile. As he guided her around on the dance floor, he felt as if he was soaring amidst the clouds. Her touch was light, and her elegance superb as she followed his lead. Twirling her around, he heard her small, pleasurable intakes of breath, and his eyes danced with amusement. He drew her close to him, producing yet another gasp. Getting lost in the euphoria of having her so near, Kit guided her around the room, their dance extending in a large circle. She was an amazing dancer. At one point, he placed both hands on either side of her waist and lifted her in the air, spinning her around. It was remarkable to him how light she was, like a feather. Setting her back down, he guided her towards him. He knew the song was coming to an end, but longed to keep her close, so he pulled her backwards into a soft dip. Her porcelain-coloured neck opened to his view, as she leaned her head downward, lost in the moment. Kit had to control himself, for the desire he had to bend down and kiss her softly exposed neck. Gently pulling her upright, the two stopped as the orchestra drew the song's conclusion. Kit placed his hand to her chest as she gracefully lowered herself to the floor, averting her gaze. The crowd erupted into applause, but Kit's gaze was still solely on his enchantress. She rose from the floor, her brown eyes immediately latching onto his blue ones. Both were smiling, breathing deeply, not from the strenuous dance, but from the incredible feelings coursing through their veins. The orchestra struck up another tune, and Kit immediately seized her hand again. He wasn't going to let her out of his sight. Other couples filtered onto the dance floor, but Kit decided what he wanted more than anything was to speak with her one-on-one, just the two of them. She surely had questions, like he did, but here wasn't the place to converse. Twirling her around, he whispered, "Come with me." He was pleased to see that she happily took him up on his invitation, allowing him to guide her off the dance floor into the hallway. There were guards, standing every few feet. His heart racing, Kit pulled her into the first available room, one decorated with paintings and portraits of his family. "So you're the prince!" she exclaimed the second he let go of her. He could tell she was clearly shocked, confirming to him that she had indefinitely thought he was merely an apprentice. He hurriedly shut the doors before twisting around to face her. "Not the prince, exactly," he kindly corrected. "There are a bunch of princes in the world. I'm merely a prince." "But your name's not really Kit," she said with an exasperated smile. "Certainly it is. My father still calls me that." "But you're no apprentice," she conveyed, obviously embarrassed for not realizing who he was during their first encounter. "I am an apprentice monarch, still learning my trade," he said in a rush, trying to convey that he paid her no ill will for not recognizing him. "Oh, gosh," she laughed, walking away to wrap her head around all these revelations. "Please forgive me," Kit pleaded, hoping she wasn't angry. "I thought you might treat me differently if you knew. I mistook you for a good honest country girl, but now I see you just didn't want to overawe a plain soldier." "Little chance of that," she commented with a chuckle. "No more surprises?" he asked, holding out his hand. She stepped forward, taking it. Hesitantly she agreed, "No more surprises." Pulling up her skirts a little, she quickly crossed the room. "Is that you?" she gasped. "I hate myself in paintings, don't you?" Kit asked, following her to where his self-portrait hung on the wall. It was the original Master Phineas had painted for him for the ball. "No one's ever painted my portrait," she said lightly, thinking nothing of how strange that was to Kit. "No? Well, they should." Her brown eyes left the portrait to stare at the inspiration, a faint blush colouring her cheeks. Her mouth dropped open a little in surprise. Looking away from him, she shyly muttered, "Thank you kindly for the compliment, Your Highness." Kit searched her soft features, her large brown eyes decorated with long lashes, her adorable straight nose, her full red lips, her dazzling smile, her soft rounded jawline. For the first time in his life, he was completely speechless. Exquisite was the only word he could think of, but even that didn't satisfy him. She was angelic. No, she was enchanting. He wanted to wrap her up in his arms and carry her away. "Come with me," he invited, holding out his hand. "Okay," she whispered shyly, taking it. Her fingers curled into his, and the softness of her touch caused shivers to run down his spine. In a daze, he led her out of the room, down the hall, and out to the palace grounds. Torches were lit every few feet along the stony path they trod on. A brilliant full moon shined down on them, adding additional light. The night sky was clear, the sea glimmering in the distance. Soon the riotous noise from the ball was left behind. replaced with the soft song of the fountains, and the gentle click from his maiden's shoes against the path. "Won't they miss you at the ball?" she asked as they walked further away from the palace. "Maybe. But let's not go back just yet," Kit muttered, desiring to spend every precious second of this night with her. "All right," she muttered, "but please don't feel the need to entertain me if you have other duties to attend to this evening." Kit stopped, taking her hand. She twirled around, her elegant gown flowing magically about before settling once more. Bowing, he raised her hand to his lips. "The only duty I have tonight is to spend it however I wish. And I wish, my lady, is to spend it with you." Her cheeks flushed an adorable shade of pink, as her perfect smile that he loved so much caused her eyes to sparkle. "Then I will be honoured to enjoy your company, Your Highness," she answered. "Please call me Kit." Her blush deepened. "All right, Kit." Grinning madly, he straightened, and the two continued walking down the steps towards where the footbridge stood over the steady stream, running across the grounds like a silvery snake. "If I may, my lady, may I ask if you received the personal invitation I left you in the woods?" "I did indeed," she confirmed, and Kit grinned as she continued. "And I must say thank you for the beautiful blooms, Your Highness. I mean, Kit." She glanced at him with an embarrassed smile. "They were positively lovely. The most beautiful bouquet I've ever seen." "I fear they will never measure up to the beauty they were intended for." She glanced at him, her cheeks flushing again. Why did he enjoy seeing her blush so much? She hadn't blushed in their first meeting. Perhaps she did so more tonight because she just felt as vulnerable as he did, just as lost on how to properly convey herself as he was. His words were just pouring from his mouth, and he feared he may come across as superficial to her. To his surprise and delight, she smiled and simply said, "You are too kind, Mr. Kit." Kit relaxed. She liked him. At least he was pretty sure she did. Swallowing, he placed his hand behind his back and continued to walk with her, his thoughts fluttering all about in his brain. How could he even possibly attempt to marry someone else when this golden-haired angel captivated him so? She carried herself with grace and poise. Her pace matched his own perfectly. And to him, she was not a princess, but a queen. Kit frowned as he thought of what would happen when they returned to the palace. The Grand Duke would try everything in his power to get the Princess Shelina in his arms. But he felt that by doing so, he would violate the once-in-a-lifetime love he had the good fortune to stumble upon. He would have to be a complete fool to give that up. At this point, they had reached the area with the footbridge. "What's wrong?" she prompted. Kit blinked. He hadn't realized he'd been silent for so long. Feeling terrible for retreating to his thoughts, he immediately returned his attentions to the here and now with her. "When I go back, they will try to pair me off with a lady of their choosing," he confessed. "I am expected to marry for advantage." "Oh, well, whose advantage?" "That is a good question." The two came to a stop, staring at each other. "Surely you have a right to your own heart," she conveyed. "I must weigh that against the king's wishes," Kit said, not knowing how else to respond. "He is a wise ruler and a loving father." "Well, perhaps he'll change his mind." Kit smiled a little before becoming sober. "I fear he hasn't much time to do so." His woodland princess looked upon him, her expression filled with absolute sadness. "Poor Kit," she breathed. "I am so sorry." Her sincerity meant the world to him. He smiled sadly as he rubbed his hand over his knuckles. "That is why I am expected to marry soon. My father wants to see me settled before he leaves to join my mother." She reached forward and took his hand without invitation. Normally, this behaviour would be considered incredibly too intimate, but for this moment, it felt absolutely right to have her compassion touch him in this manner. He instinctively slid his fingers between the spaces of hers, and both experienced rounds of unspoken pleasure beneath their skin. Her slim fingers fit perfectly between the spaces of his hand. She squeezed it comfortingly, and he squeezed back. I am truly sorry. So much has been placed upon your shoulders, she said. Her brown eyes filled with unlimited kindness. Kit looked at the grass around his feet. It is my birthright to be burdened with many things, my lady. And you have been blessed with the proper amount of courage and kindness to endure them well, I am sure, she said confidently with reassurance. Kit swallowed before looking up at her. He saw nothing but sincerity. Thank you. She smiled. What a wonderful father, she mused, to be so worried of your well-being. He is the greatest man I have ever known, Kit admitted, but don't tell him I said that. She laughed. A remarkable sound. Your secret is safe with me. Kit felt lighter than he had in years, speaking with her. Her very presence seemed to lift him. She truly was magical. May I show you something? He asked, suddenly longing to share with her all he possessed. He wanted her to know everything about him, for he felt that her influence would carry him higher than any other person he had ever met. By all means, she invited. Feeling elated, he led her down the path that would take him to his secret garden. His heart pounded harder than before as they drew near. Kit let go of her hand and ran a little ahead to the door. I have never shown this place to anyone, he confessed. He watched her peek over her shoulder, and a part of him wondered if, for a dreadful moment, if she was going to run away. Surely she didn't think he was trying to lure her away and seduce her. The terrible thought, however, disappeared as she turned back to face him with a childlike excitement brewing in her eyes. Her pace quickened a little to catch up with him, and her eagerness washed away his fears. A secret garden! She sighed with delight, prancing past him into the enclosed space. He watched her with bated breath, wondering what she thought of his private haven. Oh, I love it! She cried, spinning around to face him. Kit couldn't help but think about how much he loved her. Standing there in his garden, the pink flowers in full bloom behind her, created the perfect backdrop for what he would have taken to be the most beautiful portrait in Eretus. He could do nothing but admire her as she looked around, her eyes darting every which way until they fell on the swing. She slowly moved towards it, and he followed her as she went. He knew she wanted to sit down, but was too shy to ask. Please, he prompted, indicating for her to do so. She grinned, but shook her head slightly. I shouldn't. Kit smirked. You should. I shouldn't. You should. I shouldn't. You should. He prodded, nearly laughing. I will, she finally conceded, walking around the swing to do so. Her small fingers curled around the thick ropes, and he noticed how her muscles tightened ever so slightly. She peeked over her shoulder at him, and he smiled down upon her, his hand coming to rest on the swing's rope slightly above where hers sat. May I? He invited. Please, she responded, twisting forward. Kit placed his hand on the small of her back, then gently pushed her forward. Her long dress swished across the grassy floor, limiting the movement, but not preventing her from enjoying herself. On the third push, a light giggle escaped her, and Kit unconsciously smiled. A sudden thud in the grass caused his lovely maiden to let out a small, surprised gasp. Oh! She muttered, coming to a stop. Her shoe had fallen off. Kit immediately stepped around her and bent down, taking a moment to admire it. It's made of glass, he said, looking up at her. And why not? She smiled. He filled with wonder at her response. From those 3 words, he got a glance at how she viewed things. Why not wear something that was different? He had never seen any type of glass footwear before. He didn't even think such a thing was possible to make. The shoe was just as alluring, mysterious, and captivating as its owner. He probably would have admired it more thoroughly had it not been for the angel he now knelt in front of. He was becoming lost in those brown eyes again. He could hardly think. Allow me, he offered, mesmerized. Thank you, she said, coming forward, still on the swing. Kit helped her pull back the fabric of her dress, just enough to expose her foot. Ever the gentleman, he didn't even think of exposing her leg further. Gently taking her ankle, He slipped the shoe back into place. "There," he muttered, smiling up at her. "There," she repeated breathlessly. A wave of emotion caused Kit to unconsciously pull her closer towards him. Her little gasps of breath made his heart pound within his chest. "Won't you tell me who you really are?" he asked desperately, his voice filled with longing. "If I do, I think everything might be different," she faintly replied. "I don't understand. Can you at least tell me your name?" he begged. "My name is—" But she paused. The bells of the clock tower had begun to chime in the distance. Kit watched in confusion as her face filled with shock. "I have to leave," she gasped. "It's hard to explain. Lizards and pumpkins and things." She leapt from the swing and rushed for the exit, leaving Kit completely bemused as he rose to his feet. "Wait!" he cried, perplexed. "Where are you going?" She paused at the little window he had cleared away from the vines a few months ago. "You've been awfully nice," she cried breathlessly. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. I've loved it. Every second." He heard her glass heels clinking away on the pavement as she ran back into the palace. Letting out a confused breath, Kit stepped backwards and sat down on the swing. "Lizards and pumpkins?" he muttered, bewildered. What on earth was that supposed to mean? More and more she intrigued him. He couldn't hear her glass slippers anymore. What was he doing? He couldn't let her run off now, not when he hadn't even gotten a name from her. Grinning, he left the garden and chased after her. He tore through the gardens, holding his sword at his side so it wouldn't bang against his leg. He paused, looking around wildly. She was rushing up the palace steps. He didn't waste a second. Sprinting towards the stairs, he took them two at a time. He was halfway when she reached the top, disappearing from his view. This only made him go faster, determination spurring him forward. Skidding into the hall, his eyes landed on the guards whose features were wide with surprise. They had seen the prince and the lovely young lady in the blue dress exit the palace into the gardens earlier, but they hadn't been prepared to see her running from the scene with a desperate look on her face, nor the sudden appearance of the prince. "Which way did she go?" he asked, gasping for breath. With raised eyebrows, both men pointed to the left. Kit nodded to them before sprinting off again, determined to catch her before she could completely disappear. He figured he would be able to, since she was running not only in glass shoes, but also tons of fabric. Surely that would slow her down. But she had already beaten him inside and was nowhere in the hall. He had to hand it to his maiden. She could really run. He reached the ballroom and his eyes immediately locked onto her. She was running through the crowd of dancers. He grinned. They'd slowed her down enough for him to catch up. Plunging into the sea of swishing fabrics, he pursued. Unfortunately, his attempt was interrupted by a desperate maiden who clasped his hands and pulled him into the current dance he was trying to dodge. "Your Highness!" she cried. Unwilling to let this hindrance deter him, Kit's eyes remained on his mystery princess. Though he acted like a gentleman and danced with the girl who had seized him, his steps propelled him to the staircase the princess was climbing. Again she disappeared from his view. Determination welled within him. As he reached the other side of the ballroom, he gently twirled the girl he currently digging her claws into him and let go. She spun away, he seized his opportunity and flew up the stairs. Ella was going against every longing of her heart. She had wanted nothing more than to stay in the secret garden with the prince, but she couldn't afford for her stepmother or her stepsister seeing her. She was absolutely petrified of what they would do to her if they found out she was the girl that had stolen the prince away from their ridiculous fantasies of seducing him to do their every whim. And so she ran, despite the fact that she knew he was running after her. Pushing through the crowded dance floor, ignoring the little gasps of surprise left in her wake, she climbed the staircase that would lead her to the hallway out of the palace entrance. Reaching the top, she raced for the corner, only to bump into something solid. "Oh! Oh, your Majesty!" Ella cried in complete shock. Of all the people she could have run into, she had run into the King of Eretus himself. "Young lady," the king said, just as surprised. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, curtsying. "Oh, think nothing of it, my dear," he said, smiling down at her. Completely embarrassed, but grateful he hadn't taken offence, she brushed past him with a smile. She then impulsively turned around and spoke her mind breathlessly. "I wanted to say, your Majesty, your son Kit is the most lovely person I've ever met. So good and brave. I hope you know how much he loves you. Realizing she had spoken quite boldly, she bowed and twisted on her heel. Excuse me. She rushed down the hall, desperate to reach the carriage. Please let me make it there before the clock strikes 12, she prayed. Kit's pursuance of the mystery princess did not go unnoticed by either the Grand Duke or the captain. They had seen him chasing after her across the ballroom floor and up the staircase where she had disappeared. Abandoning the people they had been entertaining, both men ran after the prince. Kit didn't realize they were attempting to follow him. He had only one thought in his head: catch up to the princess before she disappeared. He vaguely remembered running past his father, the older man calling out his name. Kit ignored him, making a mental note to apologize profusely for doing so at a later time. He emerged out into the hall leading to the palace entrance. His boots slammed against the marble floor as he cried out, "Wait!" Even though he could no longer see her, he hoped his voice might deter her flight. He could hear others following in his wake, but he didn't turn around to find out who it was. "Your Highness!" someone called. He recognized the voice of Captain Alistair, but didn't acknowledge him. Reaching the top of the palace steps, he saw her in the middle. She was currently stooping to pick something up. "Wait!" he cried again, trying to get her attention. She looked up at him like a frightened deer, frozen momentarily in place. "Where are you going?" He shouted down at her. She turned, ignoring him, continuing to fly down the stairs. Kit pursued her. "Come back!" he called, but she didn't falter. She reached a magnificent golden carriage and climbed inside, the footman slamming the door behind her. The carriage pulled away. "Wait!" Kit shouted desperately, but it was too late. She had already reached the gate. Coming to a stop, he discovered the reason for her short reprieve on the stairs. One of her glass shoes had slipped from her feet. Bending down, he picked it up with both hands. Captain Alistair and the Grand Duke finally caught up with him. "Captain, my horse!" Kit commanded, looking towards the gate, where he could see the carriage riding off into the town. "No!" the Grand Duke protested. "This may be some intrigue to lure you from the palace. Your father needs you here." Kit doubted his mystery princess had any ill intentions towards him, but the Grand Duke was right. He couldn't abandon the ball or his father. The Grand Duke passed down the steps, shouting for the guard to mount their horses at once. Kit hoped they would catch up to her and bring her back to him. He stared down at the shoe, captivated. "I was having a fine old time," Captain Alistair complained behind him. "You had to go and pick that one, didn't you?" He tromped past him to go and follow after the Grand Duke. Kit grinned, staring off at the gates in pure delight. "Yes, I did." End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one because I absolutely loved it. I do know that I recorded this one before, but I don't know what happened. I'm terribly sorry. But oh my god, that was gorgeous. The romantic in my heart is so happy with that chapter. It's innocent and formal, yet intimate, and you can tell that they really want each other, but they're also listening and respecting each other's boundaries. She didn't want to leave, but she was just scared. Oh, this movie does something to me. It always has, ever since I first watched it. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, cows and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.